The Michael Bagel. It was a cold, early morning in the heart of New York City. Two rivaling bagel shops opened their doors to the quickly crowding masses. Extremely lengthy lines began to form outside the two, people clamoring in a mass of excitement. In the back room of one of these bagel shops, a sudden burst of light explodes outwards. The world-famous John Heath looms over the revolutionary, mouth-watering bagel recipe, bathing the onlookers with a golden radiance. A divine smell wafts forth, enticing the crowd with its rich notes. Among the huddling masses stood 34-year-old Guy Moretti, attempting to get an edge on his competition. "Heath!" Guy hissed, as he spotted his beady eyes. John stood proudly, his lip curling slightly, almost as if he knew who was watching. "My dear beloved customers, I do believe I am ready to unveil my latest product. The divine Michael Bagel. Every bite you take is like an SFX explosion of delightful flavor, with a nice telephoto shot afterward." John stepped aside. Fireworks went off as the light consumed the area around him. Guy shuddered. He couldn't believe his eyes. Another recipe! John was always trying to be one step ahead. He had never seen anything so blissful, so holy. It was the exact image of perfection. From the moment he saw it, Guy knew he needed that bagel, shining within the confinement of his display. He was prepared to do anything to have just a peek at the recipe. He closed the shop after a hard day's labor. It was time to put a plan into action. With the stars and moon above not even present, Guy tiptoed his way towards the dimly lit back entrance of the shop. He'd been studying John's store for years now, and finally has an elaborate plan to make his way inside. It was go time. The first move he plans to do is to slide sluggardly against the back wall, avoiding the cameras and motion sensors. He then will make his way to John's workshop, where he keeps all of his secret recipes. No one else had seen what it looks like. In one swift move, he will swipe the recipe under the glass dome and escape the premises before anyone realizes he was even there. Thankfully, the back door was already unlocked, so he did not need to find a clever way to get in. It was just like John to be so careless. Before he steps inside, he checks his surroundings to make sure he's not being followed by anyone. Then he opens the door slightly and slinks through it, closing it silently behind him until the light from the streetlights faded away. He successfully entered the bakery without anyone noticing. He tiptoes into a dark room. There are neatly organized collections of cleaning supplies and appliances on the shelf and holders on the walls. In front of him is a steel door leading into the main halls of John's restaurant. He positions himself with his back against the wall and creaks the door open. He peers into the hallway to see if the coast is clear. Out of his peripheral view, he sees dozens of John's henchmen spread out across the dimly lit hallway leading to the recipe room. He moves into the shadows of the hallway, getting a better look at his henchmen. He then slithers through the shadowy corridor, making his way towards the recipe room, making sure no one saw him. On his left was the door to John's workshop. He notices the henchmen guarding the door, and he needed to figure out a way in. Quick thinking, and he knew his only way in was to approach them and bring them to defeat. He stepped out in front of one of the henchmen and slapped his throat with his palm, pushing in his Adam's apple and causing the man to fall to the ground in a fit of choking. Guy stepped over the choking man, and the three other henchmen notices this and rush towards Guy. The first man arrives, only to face a swift kick to the head from Guy. He drops to the ground with a deep thud. The other two arrive and begin to lunge at Guy, each of them throwing hooks. Guy slips the punches and catches the legs, kicks one of the henchmen, causing him to topple into the other one. The two begin to get back up, but Guy was quicker. He slams the head of one of the henchmen into the ground, while springing the other into an arm bar and snaps it like a chopstick. Both are knocked out in the cold on the ground, ending that encounter. Guy wiped his hands. "Well, that was easier than I thought," he said, All those years of training in Italy finally came to fruition. After taking a second to relish in his victory, Guy waltzed into the room. As he walked into the room, quickly closing and locking the door behind him, he was finally in John's workshop. The recipe was easy to spot, glittering under the extremely clean glass dome in the spotlight. He made his way over, but before he even held up his hand, he couldn't help but notice something along the walls. He stood in awe at the perfection of it, glimmering in the overhead lights. He inches closer to the recipe and begins to notice some odd things in the text. Raisins, gold leaves. Guy couldn't believe his eyes. He'd never been so surprised. These were his ideas, in plain sight on the recipe that John had supposedly created. Guy's face grew red, but he couldn't help but feel a small sense of pride alongside his immense rage. Guy snatched the recipes off the wall. John couldn't get anywhere without him. He deserved this. He stole this. He set the other recipes along the wall alight, kindling an intense flame hot enough to quickly envelop the room. Guy lazily begins to stroll out of the room, flames creeping up behind him. He smirked. If only he had his sunglasses with him. But then the fire alarm finally goes off, alerting the entire shop to the fire in the recipe room. Better late than never. Guess I have to file an OSHA report for faulty fire alarms, he thought to himself with a slight smile. He enters back into the hallway, closing the door of the burning room, and turning to face a group of goons and their leader, John Heath. I see you found my collection, he said. To Guy's surprise, he didn't seem angry at all. In fact, the man looked confident. John reached his hand back, motioning to one of his goons. He snatches a baguette from the goons and tosses it to Guy. Get ready to taste the pain, Guy. John swings towards him, his baguette cutting through the air. Guy brings up his baguette to block. John's weapon recoils, leaving an opening for Guy to stab towards his chest. He almost reaches until John pulls back and parries the attack from Guy, sliding his baguette down the length of Guy's until he reaches his hands. It smacks onto Guy's hands, leaving them stinging and red. Guy, in a fit of anger and sheer strength, brings his baguette up and forcefully swings it down towards John's head. John brings up his baguette to block, but it's too late. Guy smacks into the middle of John's weapon, splitting into two. His baguette continues down until it hits John in the head, knocking him out and sending him spiraling to the ground with a loud thud. The goons visibly recoil, not expecting their boss to be defeated in the art of baguette battling. The goons, in the recoiling, view upon the image of Guy Moretti, a baguette in hand, and a fire in the background. He looks absolutely evil, devilish in every facet. They're terrified, and abandon all the thought of fighting Guy. They never would stand a chance against him anyways. Guy was actually scared himself. He needed to get out of that fire and fast. He couldn't have anyone see him outside. His image would be ruined if the word got out on what he had just done. The goons make way for Guy, even though they were spiteful, and then they rush out of the building, leaving Guy to follow behind. Guy stood back. Despite the work it took, despite the future consequences, he raised his arms in victory. Even as the blue lights shone against his back, he didn't care. This was his moment. The end.